Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology. I'm here with Bob today. Bob's here is going to have another meeting of his book club. And today, Bobby's going to talk about a book from 2017 by the author, Daniel Wolff. The title of this book, it's a mouthful. It's Grown Up Anger, The Connected Mysteries of Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, and the Calumet Massacre of 1913. Yep, the title's a mouthful, and it sounds like it's a fairly deep book. And from the title, it sounds like it could be pretty interesting. But Bob just finished reading this up not too long ago, and he wanted to tell you all about it. Take it away, Bobby.
All right. Thank you, Scotty. So in 1965, a 13-year-old Daniel Wolff, for the first time, hears Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone on the radio. And pardon the cliche, but his life has changed forever. That song sparked an interest in Bob Dylan. So he started doing a deep dive into Dylan and ultimately wound up going back to Dylan's very early albums. And listening to Dylan's debut album, there were mainly cover songs on that album, but there were two original Dylan songs. One of them called A Song for Woody, which was Dylan's tribute to Woody Guthrie, probably America's most famous folk musician and political radical. And Guthrie was an early hero and idol of Dylan. And in fact, Dylan dropped out of college in Minnesota, came to New York, tried to break into the folk scene there in Greenwich Village, and ultimately wound up visiting Guthrie while Guthrie lay dying in the hospital. And he wrote the song, A Song for Woody, as a tribute, to his hero. Well, hearing that song led Wolff to start digging into Woody Guthrie, and ultimately led Wolff to hear Arlo Guthrie, son of Woody, 1972 album, Hobo's Lullaby. And on Hobo's Lullaby was a song by Woody called 1913 Massacre. And when Wolff heard 1913 Massacre, he realized that Dylan used the melody to that song for the melody for A Song for Woody. And that led Wolff over the years to start digging into that song, what it was about, and how it linked Dylan and Woody together to the labor movement in this country. And that ultimately led to this book. And this book weaves three narratives together. It has a biography of Woody Guthrie, the biography of the early music of Bob Dylan, leading us up to Like a Rolling Stone, and then a history of the labor movement in the United States, centering around this 1913 incident in Calumet, Michigan. So to set the stage for this, I want to talk about Calumet, Michigan in 1913. And at that time, Calumet was that area of Michigan's Upper Peninsula was the world's leading producer of copper. And there were massive copper mines in the area. And in Calumet, Michigan were several of these mines. And Calumet was a typical mining city. Everything was owned by the mining companies. And in the old Tennessee Ernie Ford song, I sold my soul to the company store. And that was literally the situation you had in Calumet. Anyway, in 1913, the miners in Calumet went on strike against the mine companies. And it became, like so many labor movements of that era, it became violent and people died. The mine companies brought in private police. They owned the sheriff's departments and all of this. The tragedy in Calumet occurred on Christmas Eve, 1913, when more than 400 people gathered on the second floor of the Italian Hall building in Calumet for a Christmas party. And the second floor of Italian Hall was a huge open auditorium. A flight of stairs led up from ground floor to the second floor. and you have more than 400 miners and their families having a Christmas Eve party. Somebody yelled that there was a fire. People panicked. They tried to get out of the building. They came down the stairs and they wound up packed in on top of each other in the stairwell. Ultimately, 73 people died of suffocation on those stairs, 59 of them children. Now, it's never been definitively proven who was responsible for this. Popular theory is that it was someone affiliated with the mine owners, either part of their secret police or somebody else who was sympathetic. Was it done intentionally, or was it, well, intentional? Probably. Was it done with the intent of, people are going to die as a result of this, or was it a stupid prank? Anyway, that ultimately led Woody Guthrie to write the song 1913 Massacre, which is his tribute to the striking miners and all of that. So that song and that incident is the link that Wolff uses between Dillon and Guthrie and the labor movement. And in the book, he chronicles Woody Guthrie's life, and starting out from his Oklahoma background to becoming the folk singer and the radical that he was with his socialist and communist leanings and the social wars that he took on. He then also talks about Dillon and Dillon's early years as a folk musician, who was kind of mirroring what Guthrie did. He takes us up to like a rolling stone when Dillon changed his path and left the folk stuff behind and became a rock musician. Now, Dillon still maintained his social consciousness, but he kind of moved away from the labor movement and got more into other social commentary. So the third part of this book is Wolff chronicles the history of the labor movement in the United States. And not only that he centers heavily on this 1913 incident, but he gets into the history of the labor movement, talking about figures such as Joe Hill, Eugene Debs, the socialist, some of the other labor movements and strikes that took place. You had some other very violent things, the massacre of miners in Ludlow, Colorado, the violence against coal miners in West Virginia. So Wolff weaves all three of these narratives together, hence the title about grown-up anger. And he concludes the book, the final chapter of the book is Wolff recounting the status of working people in this country today. And in the final chapter, he talks about the jobs that have disappeared from this country, the hollowing out of what we call the Rust Belt, all of those jobs that disappeared. He cites statistics about falling wages for workers, and how he documents that over the last several decades, the wages for working people in this country have stagnated, if not fallen. He chronicles the rise of the one percenters and the big concentration of wealth in the hands of a very few people. So to me, it's a fascinating story that merges these three things together. Now, is this a full biography of Woody Guthrie? No. Is it a full recounting of the labor movement in this country? No. Is it a full history of Dillon? No. But it's enough to give you a real good feel for these three topics. And Wolff has a very extensive bibliography where he references, the source material he used for this. So if these appear to be topics that might intrigue you, this is a great place to start. And then, you can go into more definitive detail on these topics. Now, on a side note, this book captivated me because of a personal connection. And my paternal grandparents immigrated to this country from Croatia in Eastern Europe in the late 1890s. And in fact, I have on my t-shirt that says American raised with Croatian roots in honor of this. And my grandfather was a copper miner in Calumet. Now, he moved away from there prior to the 1913 strike and went to Illinois, where he became a coal miner. And a few years back, my wife and I finally had a chance to travel to Calumet because I wanted to see where one of the places where my grandfather lived and worked. And of course, the copper mines have been gone for decades. And Calumet, which at one time was a city of more than 20,000 people, is now a village, and the area relies on tourism more than anything. And much of the area is now a national park dedicated to the history of the copper mining. And there's a museum you can go to that details the history of the copper mining. And as a retired firefighter paramedic, I got a chance to do a fascinating side trip to the fire museum in Calumet. And on display there, they have the call box that was pulled to alert the fire department to the incident at Italian Hall. And they have the original logbook where the on-duty firefighters documented going on this run. And so there's a personal connection to Calumet to me. Plus, I am a child of a blue-collar family, and I was part of that baby boom generation, that benefited from what my forefathers went through to make a better life for me. I got to go to college and have professional careers and all those things, none of which my grandfather or father had. And I have kind of a unique place because I can trace my lineage in this country back to the 1890s up through today with only 3 generations. And my grandfather had my dad late in his life. So my dad was born in 1914. He didn't get married until he was 39. I came along late in his life, so we spread that across a time span that normally would be 4 or 5 generations. I really didn't know my grandfather. He died when I was 12 years old in 1967. He suffered from black lung disease at the end of his life from all his time in the coal mine. Family legend has it that my grandfather wanted to get out of the coal mines and he wanted to go see the sunshine. And he also didn't want my dad to follow him into the coal mines. So in 1929, my grandfather took his savings, bought sight unseen a farm in southeast Missouri based on a newspaper ad, and moved the family to a farm outside the small town of Naylor, Missouri. And of course, the stock market crashed in October of 29. The local bank failed. My grandfather lost all his money. And then the heat and drought of the dirty 30s came, the crops failed. Family legend has my grandfather standing out in the withered field with his crops, shaking his fist at the sky, screaming, "I've seen all the goddamn sun I want to see." And he wound up going back into the coal mines to help feed the family. My dad had to drop out of school in the 8th grade to get whatever jobs he could to help the family. My dad ultimately wound up in the steel mills of Gary, Indiana, and then later in the automotive factories in Detroit, both great union jobs. And it was in Detroit where he was when Pearl Harbor was attacked in March of 42. My dad left the automotive plants, volunteered for the Army, and served the duration. Came back after the war, took over the family farm where I was born. So I have these blue-collar roots, and I really appreciate the sacrifices that my grandfather and my father's generation made to provide the life that I had, and especially the struggles that they went through with the labor movement. And Wolff captures a lot of that in this book. So I apologize for that lengthy family history, but I wanted to paint you a picture of what this book meant to me. And I think far too many of us today take for granted the things that we have: the 40-hour work week, Social Security, the wage and labor laws, all of these things that we have that protect us, and the sacrifices that preceding generations had to make to get those rights. And so I think this book would help you understand the price that was paid for those rights that we all enjoy today. Anyway, that's my take on grown-up anger. I recommend it if you're interested in labor history, and if you would like to know more about Bob Dylan's early roots and the story of Woody Guthrie. So that's it, Scott.
Let me try that again now that I've unmuted myself. Wolff is not an author that it's not a name I'm familiar with, but I was just looking through his other titles. Have you read anything else by him?
No, this is the only thing that I've read by him.
Because I noticed that in 2005 he wrote a similar book. I guess based on his listening to Bruce Springsteen. He wrote a book titled 4th of July, Asbury Park, A History of the Promised Land, which sounds to me like sort of the same same approach that he took to this one.
Right. And then he's also done, I think, a biography of Sam Cooke. So he's done several music-related books, and he's been an essayist. So he's been very prolific. And
yeah, it looks like he also co-authored some mostly photography books, you know, that chronicle like the growth or the evolution of like a small town somewhere or something like that. So sounds like an interesting character. I assume he's still around. I can't find a real biography of him. Well, I didn't know that I didn't know that your family came from Michigan. I know your in-laws are in Michigan.
Right. I've got Michigan roots. And
this is Calumet is up in the Upper Peninsula. I was looking at a map, which up in the finger, like very north of the Upper Peninsula. I mean, that's a whole completely different state than where Detroit is, right?
Yeah, there's without going into great detail, there's a really interesting thing there, because the Upper Peninsula is separate from the Lower Peninsula, and for a long time in the state's history, you could only get between the two by taking a ferry and such. And then finally, they put in the Mackinac Bridge to link the two. And if you get into the Upper Peninsula, it is a different world up there. And a lot of people in the UP actually think they should belong to Wisconsin, not Michigan.
Almost could be Canada, right?
Almost could be, yeah. And when we finally got to go to Calumet, we drove up to Copper Harbor, which I think is about as far north as you can get in the United States. There may be a point of Maine that's a little farther north, but
it looks like Minnesota's a little north, but that's neither here nor there.
When you get to Copper Harbor, there's nothing but water to drive into, because you hit Lake Superior.
Yeah, I see that. It's right on the tip of that little finger on the western side of the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah, but being in the National Park Museum there was really fascinating, and it was incredible the control that the mining companies had. I mean, they literally owned everything. And according to the museum, you couldn't even have a church without the mining company approving you having it. And there were a lot of foreigners living and working up there. There were a lot of Croatians, people from Finland, Welsh, all those people who had like a mining background. And of course, they all brought their different churches and stuff with them. But if they wanted to have it like a Finnish church, they had to have the approval of the mining company. So it was definitely a different way of life.
Well, thanks for that, Bob. And we'll be back with you next week for a geography lesson of Alaska, right? Our little music discussion turned into a geography lesson and a sociological lesson. That's fine. We'd like to expand our horizons here a little bit. Thanks for that, Bob. We present this to you to start the Labor Day weekend. So this is an appropriate little discussion to start Labor Day weekend. Well, join us again, everybody, next week. We'll be back with a roundtable on Tuesday, and we'll have some more album reviews for you over the next couple of weeks. Just stick around and watch our little promo at the end of this video. You'll see what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. And remember to hit that subscribe button. Check out our blog at geezerology.com, and we will talk to you soon. So long, everybody.
Take care.